Good evening. I have 7 o'clock, so we are going to begin. So I want to welcome everyone to the second candidate information session hosted by the City of Stratford, the Town of St. Mary's, the Municipality of North Perth, the Township of Perth East, the Township of Perth South, and the Municipality of West Perth. This session is being held by Zoom, and we also have some members watching in person at the Pyramid Recreation Center in St. Mary's. This is the agenda for today's session. We will complete some introductions, provide an overview of a few housekeeping items, and then move directly into the presentation. The session can take up to 2 hours, and we will take a short break following Fred Dean's presentation. This is just to allow everyone to stretch, use the washroom if necessary, and grab some water. As noted, this is a joint session, and the purpose is to provide an understanding of Council's roles and responsibilities, and it will also explain how duties and responsibilities of public office will impact your life. This is the second candidate information session, with the first session being held last Wednesday, and that was with representatives from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. The recording and presentation from that session are available for review on each of our municipal websites. As you start thinking about running for a position on council or the school board trustee, it's important to know who you can contact to ask questions. I would like to introduce you to the area clerks who will be able to assist you. My name is Tatiana Defo, and I am the clerk for the City of Stratford. And I would also like to introduce our Deputy Clerk, Chris Bantock. Next, I would like to introduce the Clerk for the Town of St. Mary's, Jenna McCartney, the Clerk for the Municipality of North Perth, Lindsay Klein, the Clerk for the Township of Perth East, Eric Bell, the Clerk for the Township of Perth South, Lizette Scott, and last but certainly not least, the Clerk for the Municipality of West Perth, Dan Hobson. At the end of the presentation, we will share our contact information along with the web addresses for each of our municipal websites. So before we get to the reason for why we are here, I would like to go over some housekeeping items. This session is being recorded for the purpose of posting the video to our respective municipal websites. Questions can be submitted through the Zoom Q&A, and that should be located at the bottom of your screen. For anyone watching from the Pyramid Recreation Center, please submit your questions to Jenna using the paper and pens provided, and she will read them into the session at the appropriate time. We are going to answer questions at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, we will have a short 5-minute break following the presentation, and if at any time you need to use the facilities, please feel free to do so. So now I would like to welcome and introduce Fred Dean. Fred is a municipal lawyer and coach with extensive experience in the municipal sector. He was formerly the solicitor for the City of Sudbury and is a provider of council orientation and training sessions. He is the former chair of the Roma Question Box panel and the OGRA, the Last Word panel. We are pleased to welcome Fred back to present this workshop for potential candidates. And Fred, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Let's do the technical stuff. There we go. Amazing. Thank you, Tatiana. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what I hope will be an informative session for you in terms of making a decision whether you want to run for council. If you are considering it, I want to congratulate you, because I think anybody who, whether they run or not, who gives consideration to being a member of council is a big step. Members of council are community leaders, and they take on a significant and substantial role within each of the respective communities. It's really important. I was asked a question the other day about characteristics or qualities that I look for in a person running for council and being on council. And I bring it down to 2 things. I think a person has to act with integrity, and the person has to have a vision. vision that in terms of the betterment of your community, what can be done to improve the community. So integrity and vision are really key elements in the process of being a member of council. I don't need to go through this in any detail, other than I should mention that I've been involved in closed meeting investigations and also as an integrity commissioner. And I've had the chance to do orientation after the elections for a number of elections now. So I think local government is an exciting place to be, and it's rewarding. It makes a huge difference. If you decide to run for council, you're going to have a huge impact on your community. And what I want to do tonight is share with you some thoughts in a few different areas. I want to spend a few minutes on talking about what I call Municipal Government 101. I can tell you that if I'm doing this course for municipal staff or members of council, it can take anywhere from a day to 3 or 4 days. We're going to do it in about 7 minutes tonight, but I want to give you an overview and a sense of what local government is and what it means. One of the realities is local government is accountable and transparent like no other level of government, by far more accountable and by far more transparent. And we'll talk about that, how we get to that point. I'm also going to talk about municipal powers, because I think that's an important aspect of understanding what your role is if you become a member of council, and where the power comes from and where it resides within council, within the municipality itself. I get an opportunity to work with a lot of different councils throughout the 4-year term of council. And often I'll get phone calls from the mayor or from the CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, saying, we've got some problems, can you help us out? And more often than not, those problems relate to who is responsible for doing what, who has what role within the organization. So I'm going to spend a few minutes and give you a bit of a sense of what the responsibilities are being a member of council, being the head of council, and being a staff member within the context of the organization. I'm then going to switch gears and talk about some personal considerations. How's your life change if you are elected to council? What are some of the things you need to take into consideration? We'll spend a bit of time on that. I'll finish off with some personal responsibilities around codes of conduct for members of council, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. I want to talk about confidentiality a little bit and give you a sense of the importance of that in the scope of your duties. And I'm going to finish with a quick discussion about the delivery of water as an example of the regulatory scheme that municipal councillors have to be aware of and be responsible for. So we're fast approaching the May 2nd date. May 2nd is the date that nominations open, and we're fast approaching that time, and it's a good time to be doing this session, give you some time to think about what decision you want to make. If I were with you tonight in Stratford, and we were together doing this session, I would spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes talking about what local government does. Actually, I wouldn't talk about it. I would get the people in the room to do the work. And here's what I want you to do if you're listening tonight. After this is over, I'd like you to take a piece of paper and write down everything municipal government, local government does for you in your community. It's astounding. If you get to 50 or 75 items, you've done pretty well. I mean, you're not even close. The list is well over 100 services that are provided by local government. And when you do the list, I encourage you to do it not at the 30,000 foot level, don't just put down roads and then move to another. Begin to think about all the things that are impacted by roads, all the services that when we use the word roads, what are we talking about? Similarly, if you pick recreation, what are the sort of things that are there? And then give some thought to services that are provided not by the municipality, but by some agency associated with the municipality. And the best example I can give you is the library. Council cannot operate a library. It's not allowed under the legislation, under the provincial legislation. If the community wants to have a library, council has to create a library board. And that public library board will be responsible for the administration, responsible for providing the library services within the community. There are a number of what are called local boards, and local boards are separate entities in law. They are separate corporations. Municipalities are corporations, by the way. And they all have a separate, distinct relationship with the municipality. So they're library boards, the health unit, conservation authority, the whole series of them. So I'm not going to take a long time tonight, but I encourage you to sit down and develop a list. And as I say, hopefully you can get to 75. And if you can get more, that's really good. But the purpose of the exercise is this: the scope of local government, the scope of what members of council and the council is responsible for is enormous. And many of those activities are highly regulated by provincial regulations primarily, but sometimes by federal as well. So it's important to have a handle on not only the breadth and the scope, but also on the regulatory nature of many of the services that are provided by the municipality. Powers come from the province. Municipalities do not have any inherent jurisdiction. In order for a municipality to undertake a service or provide an activity, there must be authority given to it by the province. We know that that's significant, and we know that you've heard the phrase probably municipalities are creatures of the province. And that was made clear this last year when the City of Toronto, you'll recall back in 2018, the provincial government in the middle of the campaign, this is in the summer of 2018, municipal campaigns were running across all 444 municipalities in the province. And the province shrunk the size of City Council in Toronto by half. And litigation pursued. The city argued that the province didn't have the jurisdiction or the authority to do that. And at the end of the day, the Supreme Court of Canada, the highest level of court in Canada, said, yes, the province had that authority and that jurisdiction, as inappropriate as it might have been, but it had that authority to do it. So the powers in the municipality come from the province, either in a statute or an act or a regulation under under a statute. I want to give you a bit of a history lesson very quickly. The Municipal Act had been in effect for about 150 years when it was finally rewritten for the first time, and this was in 2001. And the Municipal Act is probably the primary statute that we'll be talking about certainly tonight. It's a significant document. It's quite large. It's quite long. But there are well over 100 statutes, provincial statutes that affect municipal government in Ontario. But the Municipal Act was being rewritten for the first time, and it changed a lot of concepts and a lot of principles that had been in place for a long, long time. One of those principles was that municipalities had names, and they started the low villages and townships and towns and small cities and big cities. And the powers were given by the province based on size. So if you were, a village or a township, you had a few powers. If you were a town, you got some more, and a small city and a big city, you got some more. That all changed when the new act came into effect in 2000. It was passed in 2001 and came into effect in 2003. And it provided for there only being 3 kinds of municipalities in the province, just 3. The first is single tier, and there are a number of single tier municipalities. All of Northern Ontario is single tier. And there are some communities and cities in Southern Ontario, Stratford being one of them, but Ottawa, Windsor, London. And here's the key. The province, remember I said all the powers come from the province. The province took this bundle of powers and gave it to all the single tier municipalities. Didn't matter if you were 1,000 people or several 100,000 people. All the single tier municipalities got this bundle of powers, this similar bundle of powers coming from the province. That's a significant difference in terms of what powers and what responsibilities were held by different levels of government, different sizes of government. The other 2 types of municipalities are upper tier and lower tier. Upper tier are counties and regions and district. Muskoka is a district. And within those upper tier municipalities, there are a number of local municipalities, townships and towns and perhaps cities. And the bundle of powers that the province gave gets divvied up between the upper tier and the lower tier. And it gets divvied up in different ways in different parts of the province. And you have to look at the legislation to see what powers the lower tier municipalities have in a particular area and which ones are upper tier responsibilities and which ones are shared. So that was a significant difference. The other thing that happened around the time of this new legislation is municipalities had the opportunity to choose the name. In other words, there had been villages and townships and towns and cities, and they all, as I said, denoted a size, because the bigger the size, the different title that went with it. After the election, or after the legislation came into effect, one of the things that happened is municipalities could change the name. And in fact, when you heard the introductions tonight, several of the municipalities here are not townships or towns or cities. They're municipalities. Their formal name is the municipality of. That's very different, but they're all equal, and you can't tell anymore by the name of the municipalities what the size is. Dryden is a community in Northern Ontario, and it's a city. Dryden's population is about 8,500 people. Burlington, or Oakville, let's talk about Oakville, is a town that has a population about 200,000 people. So you can't tell by referring to it as a town or referring to it as a city exactly what the size is. There are some townships around the GTA, the Greater Toronto area, that are 25,000 plus population. So you just can't tell. So it's a very different environment in terms of how we describe and how we see the municipalities. When that new act came out, I began to read it, and I got as far as Section 5, and I read Section 5 half a dozen times at least. And I think it is probably the most important section in the Act. And it's simple, and it's pretty straightforward. And it says this: that all powers of a municipality shall be exercised by council and shall be exercised by the passage of a bylaw of council. Power shall be exercised by council by the passage of bylaws. Notice the word shall. Shall is mandatory. So the province has said it is mandatory that if municipality is going to exercise powers, it will be done by council and it'll be done by way of a bylaw. So when I talk about passing a bylaw, bylaws have to be passed at public meetings. And I call these meetings duly constituted meetings. Let me just take you through quickly what is a duly constituted meeting in which a bylaw can be passed. Well, the first thing is the municipality has to give notice to the public. Municipality has to tell the public in advance that the meeting of council is being held, whether it's a regular meeting or a special meeting, that a meeting of a committee is being held. And that notice will include the agenda, the items that are going to be on the agenda for consideration by council or by the committee. That's an important element of a duly constituted meeting. And it doesn't matter if the meeting is open or closed to the public. Notice has to be given. It's really fundamental. The second element is that the meeting has to be open to the public. You have to give notice, and the meeting has to be open to the public. Public is entitled to attend. The courts have said, interestingly, that the primary responsibility for the public at council meetings is to observe, to see how decisions are being made at the council table. And that's a really significant point, and it's an important one to keep in mind. So first two principles, you have to tell the public you're holding a meeting, and the meeting has to be open to the public. And that means, given the last 2 years, what we've been through, that means open to the public by way of Zoom or whatever platform you're using. Public are entitled to attend that. Important concept. The next part of a duly constituted meeting is there has to be a quorum. Now, I work best with small councils, so I'm going to work with a council of 5, but the principle applies no matter what the size of your council. Quorum is a majority of the members. A majority of the members. So on a council of 5, quorum is 3. Majority of the members of council. That means that council can meet with 5 members, but it can also meet down to 3. There can be 3 members, and that is a properly called appropriate meeting. So quorum is the next part of this test. The next part of the test is the majority prevails, and that means the majority of the members present. So in our council of 5, if all 5 are present, in order to pass a bylaw or to pass a resolution, 3 members have to vote in favor of it. What happens though if there are only 3 members present, only the bare quorum requirement? In that case, 2 members have to vote in favor in order to pass a bylaw or a resolution. Notice, interestingly enough, that's less than a majority of council. But the Municipal Act says that that's the appropriate rule. And so the quorum must be present and a majority vote will prevail and make the determination for council. The final principle is that all members vote. And that includes the head of council. All members on council. The head of council, I'm going to talk about the role of the mayor, the head of council in a few minutes, but it is a very difficult responsibility chairing council meetings because it's a dual role in the sense that the head of council is entitled to vote, can participate, but has to apply all those functions of being an effective chair of a meeting. I have the chance to work with a lot of mayors over the years and talking about how to fulfill this role that frankly is a really difficult one. And I can tell you this, the view from the chair, the mayor's chair, is very different than the view from a councillor's chair. Different responsibilities, different perspective. And it's really important, I think, to keep that in mind when we're looking at this. So I talked about accountability and transparency, and I said that local government's the most accountable and transparent level of government. And I think that's true. Interestingly, I don't know if it's still there, but there was for years on the provincial website, a section dealing with cabinet. And the point was made that cabinet decisions are confidential and they're not to be shared with the public. So that decision-making process is not transparent at all. It's a very different situation than what we have in local government. So let me give you a few examples of how a local government is transparent and how it is required to be accountable. I've talked about open meetings. The principle in the Act says very clearly, council meetings shall be open to the public. There are some exceptions for closed meetings. And there are some things to keep in mind. As I said before, notice of that meeting, whether it's open or closed, has to be given in advance by the clerk's office. But if there to be a closed meeting, it can only be for a limited number of subject matters. And those are set out in the Municipal Act. The subject matters for which a council or a committee may go into a closed meeting to deliberate a matter. So the subject matter is the first issue. The second issue is, how does council move into a closed meeting? Well, the province again has set out some rules, and it has said that there must be a public resolution passed before going into the closed meeting that says council is going to hold a closed meeting. And here's the general matter, the general nature of the matter, or the matters to be deliberated. So again, that's part of this transparency, telling the public that there is a closed meeting and the general nature of the matter or the matters to be discussed. And thirdly, the province sets out rules in terms of what can be done at closed meetings, what types of votes. So all of these issues come into play and have to be looked at. Municipalities have to look at that very carefully when they're putting agendas together. And since 2008, every municipality has had to have a closed meeting investigator who is charged with the responsibility of investigating complaints about closed meetings. And those closed meetings can be formally called closed meetings, or they can be meetings that aren't formal at all. It can be a number of members of council meeting at the coffee shop. Do people still, are we getting back to meeting at a coffee shop? I'm not sure. Or on the internet. Closed meetings can occur not just within the context of the formal meeting, but can be informal get-togethers if municipal business is being discussed by the group. Council has an obligation to put in place and maintain a number of policies. And these policies are all put in place by the enactment of bylaws. So there'll be a bylaw for each one of these policies. There are quite a number of them. I want to just talk about two of them very quickly. The one policy is called the Accountability and Transparency Policy. And that's the policy that is intended to indicate how the municipality is endeavoring or trying to ensure that it is accountable and transparent. If you are thinking of running for council, I encourage you to have a look at that policy. It will give you an insight in terms of, in far more detail than I'm going to get into tonight, how local government is accountable and how it is transparent in its decision-making processes. So take a look at that one. That's one that I would put on the list to read. They're not very long, usually about 3 pages at the most, and it will give you a real insight in terms of what's in the municipal situation of being accountable and being transparent. The other policy that's relatively new, the requirement for this one is relatively new, is a council member staff policy. Notice it doesn't say council staff policy, it says council member staff policy. This is individual to individual. And it goes towards the relationship between council members and staff, and it gets tied into the code of conduct for members of council. It's the province saying there has to be some further definition in terms of what the responsibilities are between the administrative side, the staff side, and the elected council side. So those policies are in place. They're not intended to be dust collectors. They're intended to be active, and I can assure you that staff are looking at these policies on a regular basis, and they need to be updated from time to time. Okay, I talked earlier about the importance of roles and responsibilities, who's doing what within the organization. And again, not surprising, the province has set the job descriptions. The municipality simply doesn't make it up. The province has put it in place. And I want to take you through these fairly quickly, but just to give you a sense of what some of the issues are. So we'll talk about council, and then we'll talk about the head of council and where that term came from. And finally, we'll talk about the responsibilities of staff. So let's start with council. I said before that municipalities are corporations, and indeed they are. Council, in effect, is like the board of directors of the corporation, much like a board of directors of a private corporation, but with far greater powers and far greater responsibilities. Municipality, we know, exercises corporate power. That's Section 5 of the Municipal Act. The Act provides that council represents the public, and there's no surprise there. Members of council are talking to the community all the time, people within the community, and they're bringing forward what they're hearing in the community to council. So this representation of the public is a critical aspect of member of council's role. The next consideration is that council will consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. You have to read that with the understanding that municipality has 2 meanings. First meaning is the geographical boundaries of your community. And that constitutes the municipality, if you will. But the other meaning is the municipal corporation. Members of council have an obligation to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality at large, but also the municipal corporation. By the way, if you're in a ward system, sure, you're there to represent your ward and your people, but at the end of the day, the Act requires that members look at the well-being and interests of the entire municipality. It's not just your own ward and nothing beyond that. Interestingly, municipalities have a number of policies of insurance to protect them in various situations. Those policies of insurance, in those policies, there is a contractual provision that says that members of council and staff will act in the best interests of the municipal corporation. So it's this legislative responsibility as well as a contractual one under your policies of insurance. We've covered off the part about acting collectively and publicly and with notice, all those fundamentals of what constitutes local government. There is nothing in the Act or any Act that gives members of council any management responsibilities. If you're thinking you want to be elected to council so that you can direct work, you can't do it. It's not your job. Your responsibility is being part of this council that sets policy and makes decisions. The administrative side is entirely separate. It's not the role of members of council to be directing staff how they undertake to do the specific work. Once you're elected, if you're elected to office, you will learn that there are some limitations on the powers, individual powers of a member of council. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but it isn't a broad scope that some might think it is. So no management responsibility and some limited individual powers as members of council. What about the head of council? Well, before that, remember that 2001 Act? The Municipal Act and statutes referred to mayors and reeves and wardens and chairs, and they all applied to a specific type of government. So reeves were villages and townships, and mayors were towns and cities. Wardens were for the head of council for the county, and chairs for regions. That all disappeared in the 2001 Act, and now the Act just refers to the head of council. And so the responsibilities and the duties of a head of council, no matter what type of local government it is, a county or a region or a township or a city or a town, all the responsibilities are the same. The other change that came about is council can now change the title given to the head of council. Why would they want to do that? Well, back maybe 10 years ago, maybe a bit more, in the county of Renfrew, up in the Ottawa Valley, there are a number of townships. And the townships got talking, and they all had reeves as the head of council, and they decided that it would be appropriate, because they thought it would be appropriate to change the title from head of council from reeve to mayor. And they're now able to do that by passing a bylaw, and they did. So that those municipalities changed the title. They believe that there was more credibility, if you will, and more recognition by the public, not only locally, but worldwide, for the title of mayor. And so they made that change. Before 2001, if a municipality wanted to change the title of their head of council, they had to get a private member's bill from the province of Ontario. There is one municipality that doesn't have any one of those names. And in fact, the title is Lord Mayor. And there's one municipality that has a Lord Mayor that was given that authority back, I think, in the 80s, 1980s. And that is Niagara-on-the-Lake. So it has a very different title for its head of council. But again, all the responsibilities of the Lord Mayor in Niagara Falls are identical to heads of council right across the province. So let's take a look at some of the responsibilities that come to the office of the head of council. Preside over council meetings. In fact, the Act was changed to indicate that not only must the head preside over council meetings, but must do so efficiently and effectively. If you're going to be a head of council, you better be good at chairing meetings, because the Act requires it. And that frankly requires some training. There's some real skills to managing and to chairing a meeting of council. It's very different than a lot of other organizations. The Act provides that the head of council provides leadership to council. That's interesting. It doesn't say leadership to the municipal organization, but it says provide leadership to council. There's a line, if you will, on the administrative side. The expectation is that the chief administrative officer will provide leadership to the administration. One of the things that makes the role of the head of council different is that the head of council speaks on behalf of the municipality. That isn't given to any other member of council. How does the head of council know what to speak on in terms of speaking on behalf of the municipality? Well, you look at the bylaws and you look at the resolutions passed by the council. And that's what the head of council is obligated to speak about and to speak in favor of. Head of council has some obligations to provide information and make some recommendations to council on a number of different issues. We don't need to get into those tonight, but it's part of this leadership role, if you will, that comes with the office of head of council. It's a very different role than a councillor's role. Historically, the head of council in Ontario has been the chief executive officer, the CEO of the municipality. And if you're from a business background, the CEO is the day-to-day manager of the organization. I mean, it's pretty well known and pretty well accepted. That is not the issue in local government. There was an issue around this a number of years ago, around 2006. And people were beginning to say, let's get rid of the term CEO. It just confuses people because some mayors think they have all this administrative responsibility, which they don't. And other people were saying, no, keep the title, but let's define it. And the province should define what it means. And so the province decided to define it. And you'll find in the Municipal Act now a section that sets out a number of responsibilities for the CEO, the head of council of the CEO. And if you read those through, there are two things that are obvious. One is it's intended to show that the head of council is the champion of the municipality or the cheerleader. But it also shows very clearly that there are no day-to-day management responsibilities given to the head of council. The CEO designation, there's some talk again recently that maybe it's time to make it disappear. We'll have to wait and see, but whether it does or it doesn't, the legislation, the provincial legislation that set this up, it is clear that the CEO in a municipality, the head of council, the CEO, is not a day-to-day manager, but is in fact someone who's the champion of the municipality itself. Let's go to the staff side for a minute. Remember I said it's important that people understand their respective roles and they have respect for what people are doing. And those roles are very different within the organization. And the province has said that the first role for staff is to undertake research and provide advice to council. So what does that mean? Well, it means this, that staff do the research, they prepare the written reports that go to council, and they include in those reports a recommendation. So staff has an obligation to be the primary source of information for council and has an obligation to provide advice and make recommendations in terms of what action council should be taking on a particular matter. That's an important role for staff. And we see that in the staff reports. We see it in when staff put the agenda together. The agenda gets formed based on the order of business that council has agreed to in its procedure bylaw. Staff undertakes the research, prepares the reports, puts them on an agenda, and they will have a recommendation to council. And council, frankly, needs that advice. It's important to understand. Remember, I talked about at the beginning, the scope and the breadth of local government and the complexity and the regulatory nature. And I'll come to that later on, and we'll get an example of how important that is. Once council makes a decision, staff have an obligation to implement council's decision. Whether staff recommended the course of action or not, staff have an obligation to implement it. Every department in the municipality has procedural manuals, how you get things done within the department. Every department has them. These aren't council policies. These are just day-to-day operating manuals to to make things happen. Public Works have them, Recreation, Clerk's Office, Treasury, they all have these procedural manuals. And why are they important? Why did the province put this in the Act specifically? To carry out council's decisions. There's that scope again, the importance of the fact that council is the decision-making body. So this body acting collectively, making decisions at a meeting that has a quorum with the majority prevailing. I've used this slide or something similar to it for a long time. And I debate whether to take it out. And I every time I decide to leave it in because I love the image. Council should steer the boat rather than row it. Council sets the direction. Staff are going to be rowing the boat. Council decides the services and programs that will be offered, and staff have the obligation how to deliver those services. This is from a book back, I think in the 70s now, called Re-Embedding Government by Osborne and Gabler. It's a really good image, and it's one I think that's important to keep in mind. I want to talk about governance for a few minutes. When I talk about governance, I'm talking about the model that the municipality has to allow council to make decisions. And there are a number of different aspects to this that I think are important to put into perspective. We know from the legislation that the primary source of information and recommendations going to council comes from your staff. That's in the Act, and it's critical and it's important. But there are other sources of information that come to council to help it make a decision. One of those is the committee structure. And virtually every municipality in this province has a different committee structure. They vary in one way or another, different types of committees, different purposes. There's even a very few that have no committees at all. These are small communities, and council has decided that council is enough. They don't need any other outside source or outside committees. So why does council create committees? What purpose do committees serve? Well, at the end of the day, committees make recommendations. So council creates committees to provide advice and to do some research and make recommendations to council. Committees do not make decisions. Committees make recommendations to council as part of this governance model to allow council to make more effective decisions. And the committee structure, as I say, can take all sorts of different forms, can include members of the public, can be council members only, can be a combination of those, can be committees that last for a limited period of time, or can be intended to carry on beyond the term of council with new members coming on when the new term begins. So that's a second source. Another source of information to council at council meetings is the public. I mentioned before that the courts have said the primary purpose of the public at council meetings is to observe. But the public has a right to be heard only if council gives them that right. And council will do that through its procedure bylaw. The fundamental principle in many municipalities, most municipalities, is if a member of the public wants to come forward as a delegation, it will come forward based on the rules within the procedure bylaw that are in place. And the delegation's intent is to put a position forward to help council come to a decision in a particular way. The general rule, in my experience, is delegations should either be heard at committee or at council, but not both. And on a particular issue, there should be one delegation and one opportunity to be a delegation on that particular matter. And that's pretty common practice. Public plays a significant role. We'll talk about that role outside the confines of the council meeting later, but within the confines of the council meeting, the public's role is to observe, to be a delegation, to be heard, and to fit within the rules, delegation rules within the municipality's procedure bylaw. I've talked about local boards and the influence and the impact that they have. They're providing services, local services, but through a separate entity, such as the Public Libraries Board. If you're thinking of running for council, consider this. You better love meetings. I mean, you better really love meetings, because there are a lot of them. It isn't, I had someone say to me not long ago, you know, I think you're running for council because there's 2 council meetings a month. I can handle that. Well, that's not the reality. Members of council are on council. They have the regular and special meetings. They are on some committees. They're probably on some local boards, and they may be on other agencies appointed by council to those other agencies. There are a lot of meetings that members of council go to. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And if you're going to be on meetings a lot, you better get good at it. Because if you don't get good at it, you're going to have a really frustrating 4 years, because you're not going to be achieving some of the things that you want to be achieving on council. So understand that the meetings will take up a large portion of your life, and that you have obligations around those meetings. And the expectation at the end of the day is you're going to be part of this decision-making process at council to make effective decisions on behalf of your community. Every municipality in Ontario has to have a procedure bylaw. And municipalities are pretty lucky. They get to write the rule book, subject to some requirements put in place by the province, but municipalities get to write their own rule book. And these are really significant documents. This is another one I'm recommending that you read if you're thinking of running for council, because the procedure bylaw, in my view, is one of the 2 most important documents in the municipality. The other one is the annual budget, because it sets your policy, both current budget and your capital budget. But the procedure bylaw does a whole series of things that are really significant. It has the meeting rules and the rules around conduct at meetings, including individual person's conduct of the meeting. It has your governance model, what your committee structure is. It deals with relationships between members of council, between the head of council and councillors, between staff and council, and between council and the public. It's a really broadly based, all-encompassing document, and it's a really important one. People who have questions, and councillors certainly have questions on the procedure bylaw, will look to the clerk. Clerk's the expert on the procedure bylaw, and should be referred to not for a ruling from a clerk, but for advice from time to time. I should mention a couple of things about clerks are what are called statutory officers. And by that term, it's meant that they hold a position because they have been appointed to the office that they hold, the office of clerk, by a bylaw of the municipality. So they have, once they're appointed, they have a number of responsibilities given to them by the province. So the clerk, for example, has a duty to record the proceedings of council without note or comment, has a requirement to run the election, does marriage licenses, does a whole series of, there are a number of statutes that the clerk has responsibilities given under it. There are other statutory officers, treasurer, fire chief, chief building official. They are all appointed by bylaw, and they have responsibilities given to them under provincial statutes or regulations. The other staff member I think it's important to mention is the Chief Administrative Officer. I talked about the head of council as the Chief Executive Officer, but the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer, is the senior administrator within the organization and the person to whom council will be looking for advice. So if council has issues, a member of council has needs some advice on a particular issue, they may very well start by talking to the CAO. Similarly, if a member of council has issues around procedure at meetings, the person to be talking to is the municipal clerk. Procedure bylaws are really important, really significant, and I encourage you to spend some time reading it through. If you're going to be good at meetings, you need to know what's in that bylaw and how it functions and what some of the elements are that are part of it. And these bylaws get changed every term of council because the province changes the rules or because the municipality is simply looking at updating it and making some changes in terms of relationships or in terms of the committee structure that they have. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk for a minute about how your life will change the day you're elected. Well, you'll be on cloud 9. You'll believe that everybody loves you. They don't. And people will begin to treat you differently. Your friends will talk to you differently. Sometimes your family will talk to you differently. People on the street will want to stop and chat with you, want to get their point of view across to you. You have now become a community leader, and you will be a community leader 24/7 for the next 4 years. People will view you in a very different light. And it's significant, and people will be paying attention to what you say, whether you say it verbally or whether you say it on the internet. People will be paying attention to what you say. So you need to be cautious. You need to be thoughtful about what you're saying and who you're saying it to. It's really important. Being a member of council requires a total commitment. It takes an incredible amount of time and effort to be effective in this role. I've made a habit in the last few years of talking to people who have been employees for a long time with the municipality and have retired or moved on to something else, and members of council who are no longer members of council but have either voluntarily or voluntarily not been returned to council. And they all say the same thing. I had no idea how I was totally committed to that position and how that role totally consumed me. It took all my time and all my effort, and it's all I thought about. It does totally consume you. And I've seen this over my entire career in local government, and it's really true. It doesn't matter whether you're a staff member or whether you are a member of council. So be prepared to take on a new role and new responsibilities. It becomes, I think, really significant. I debate whether to, I put the heading 2-tier, and I debate whether to tell you this story or not, but I'm going to tell it to you tonight. I did a session similar to this maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And I was in Eastern Ontario in a part of the province where there was a county, so it's a 2-tier level government. And I shared the podium that night with a former mayor. And as you know, in a 2-tier structure, mayors go to the upper tier. They become, by virtue of office, they're at the upper tier. And this gentleman spoke, and he said, you know, I'd been on council for a term and I was encouraged to run for mayor, and I did. And he said, and I won. And he was pretty happy. He was pretty excited, and this, you know, and not surprisingly, he went home and he walked in the door and he said to his wife, I won. I'm the mayor, and I'm going to county council. And his son came in, who's 8 or 9 years old, and he said the same thing. I won the election. I'm the mayor, and I'm going to be going to county council. And his son looked at him and he said, well, I guess I lost. The son understood that he was going to see less of his father, because he was taking on additional responsibilities, not only going from a councillor's role to a head of council, but also taking on the responsibilities of a second level of government as a member of the county council. It requires a total commitment, but it also requires you give some real thought to the impact on your family. So you need to talk to your significant other if you're thinking of running for council, and some of the implications that go along with that, because there are going to be calls, there are going to be things on social media that maybe you don't want your kids to see, that people are going to be making comments about you in the community. You will interact with the public, but so will your family. I remember in Sudbury a number of years ago, there was a huge issue around store hours. Sudbury was one of the last municipalities in Ontario to get rid of a store hours bylaw. So it regulated the hours that stores may be open. And a member of council came to me and said, I want to put a bylaw amendment to that forward that allows for an additional 2 hours a week, 2 hours a week that stores be open. And my response to him was, I think it's a mistake. Why don't you just repeal the bylaw? He said, no, I can't do that. So I prepared the bylaw, I prepared the report, put it on, and council approved it. After it was passed, when members of council went out into the community, into stores, and saw business people, they were given a hard time. That's okay. That's what they're elected for. But the reality was, so did their spouses. Their spouses would go into a store to shop, and they would suffer some abuse, frankly, from some of the employees and the store people whose hours they've having to work more hours. The councillor came to me after a few months and said, that was a mistake, should have gotten rid of it. But it demonstrated, I think, the impact of not only on you, but on your family in terms of interaction with the community. It's a significant factor. I talked about the number of meetings earlier, and I said you better love meetings. Well, understand this. Every meeting has an agenda and material supporting that agenda, and you have an obligation to read it all. And there's a lot of it. Preparation time takes a huge amount of time away from doing other things. It takes a huge amount of time away from your family and other activities. I can't express this enough, that if you are going to be on council, and if you're going to commit to being on council, you have to commit to being prepared for every meeting. And that means reading every single page of those materials you receive. Clerk told me the other night in our municipality, it's over 200 pages minimum for every council meeting. So you better love to read, and you better be good at it in terms of identifying the issues and understanding the matters that are contained within the reports. Councillors in Sudbury, back when I was there, used to use Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening to prepare for the upcoming council meeting on Tuesday. Preparation time is important as well, because you as a member of council will have an obligation to declare pecuniary interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And you may not know where they are if you haven't read every document on that agenda. So it's important to read everything, to be prepared. It's important also to ensure that you're protecting yourself under possible conflicts under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So meetings become a huge part of your life, and preparation for those meetings become a huge part of your life, and each has an impact on your family. And that's why I think it's important to have some conversation about what it means to become involved in local government. It's a wonderful place to be. It's rewarding and fulfilling, but it also requires a real commitment in terms of a full commitment in terms of being prepared for meetings and being part of the process that's going on around you. This is kind of a slide that moves us into some other materials, but I want to just mention micromanagement. I talked earlier about the fact council members have no authority to direct staff, and that is called in our world micromanagement. If a member of council is attempting to micromanage, I can tell you that has a huge detrimental impact on your organization. Huge impact. That's one of the reasons that new policy has come into effect. Council members cannot micromanage. They're not entitled to do so, and you could cause real problems. If you want to have an impact on your organization that's negative, just try to micromanage. It has to be dealt with. And I think every member of council has an obligation, if they see that happening, to say to the other councillor, that's not right. Stop doing that. Incivility's been around a long time, but it's really come to the forefront in a few municipalities around the province. There are a couple of municipalities that incivility and uncivil conduct by members has resulted in costs to the municipality in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. A lot of the training I do now has a section on incivility and what's appropriate and what's inappropriate conduct. Remember, I talked at the beginning about respect for the position you hold and the position others hold. You need to treat everyone with respect. Council meetings should not be an issue of personal attacks. It should be debated and deliberated on the issues, not on personality. It's really important to do. I'm going to talk about confidentiality in a few minutes, and we'll go through just a few things to keep in mind when it comes to that. And then I want to talk about personal responsibilities. And I'm going to do this in several different contexts. I'm going to talk about the Code of Conduct for council members, talk about Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. I'm going to talk about water for just a few minutes as an example of personal responsibilities. We'll wrap it up when we get to that point. So let's talk for a moment about codes of conduct. Up until just very few years ago, there were a handful of municipalities around the province that had a code of conduct for members. They all looked different. They all appointed an integrity commissioner who was someone who investigated the complaint and reported to council. That changed not too long ago, just a couple, 2-3 years ago now. Every municipality must now have a code of conduct for members of council and local boards and the committees. And there has to be an integrity commissioner. And the integrity commissioner role has been expanded. Sure, they still investigate alleged breaches and they report to council, but they have other duties. And that includes educating council and the public on what's in the code of conduct and other documents that have ethical and conduct provisions in it. That includes, by the way, the procedure bylaw. Another power that's been given to integrity commissioners is the ability to respond to members who ask for an opinion. If a member asks for an opinion on a code of conduct issue or a conflict of interest issue, they can write to the Integrity Commissioner, and they can expect a response back in writing from the Integrity Commissioner. This is a really incredible opportunity for members. So the Integrity Commissioner is serving a role much broader than was originally contemplated. The other thing about the Code of Conduct is the province, when it brought this in as mandatory, passed a regulation under the statute that lists a number of specific things, specific topics or subject matters that have to be included in the code. One of them is confidentiality, by the way. Some municipalities have just developed a code with the responsibilities in the regulation, and other municipalities have gone beyond that. I'm a big believer that you use the regulation as the guide in terms of developing a code when you're a municipality. I wanted to mention something else that's happening right now. There's a bill, Bill 10, that is before the Ontario legislature, and I'll read the title to you. It's the Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act. The Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act 2022. I don't know if this is going to get passed in time before the election comes upon us, but it's going to make a significant change, and it provides in it that a council may ask or direct, not ask, direct the Integrity Commissioner to bring an application to court to have a member of council removed because of conduct, harassment, and abuse. It's a pretty significant change, and we'll have to see if it gets put in place. I think in large measure, at least one instance relates to the councillor in Ottawa, who the rest of council have been asking for this person to be removed from office, and there was no way to do it. So codes of conduct become significant. We are seeing a number of concerns expressed. We're seeing a number of complaints filed under the code. And literally every morning I go into my email and I get Google alerts and there's a number of code of conduct matters that are dealt with there. So pretty significant. I want to talk for just a few moments about the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. This piece of legislation came into effect in 1972. It's a legislation that is designed and intended to deal with members of council and committees. It is a personal obligation to the member. It doesn't apply to staff. And in fact, the courts have said that staff cannot give advice to members on specific issues under a code of conduct or under the conflict of interest legislation. So it's a personal obligation to members. It talks about pecuniary interest. So what's pecuniary? Well, pecuniary is financial. If you have a financial interest in a matter, you are obligated under this legislation to do and to not do certain things. The Act goes on to describe types of pecuniary interest, types of financial interest, and one is direct. So if I own, for example, Fred's Widget Shop on Main Street, and I'm bidding on a tender to supply widgets to the municipality. When the council meeting opens, there's an item on the agenda asking for declarations of pecuniary interest, the general nature. I would say, Your Worship, I want to declare a pecuniary interest on item number 4 because I own Fred's Widget Shop. And the clerk will then record that declaration, and it will end up in the minutes of the meeting. And if you're a member of council, you really should be checking to make sure it got recorded properly. But there are other types of interests as well. There are indirect ones. So if my widget shop is Fred's Widgets Limited, and it's bidding, that indirect pecuniary interest becomes mine. If you're an employee, if you're a shareholder in different types of companies, you have to look at the various rules. If you're a member of a body, there's some rules around being a member of a body. There are a number of aspects of indirect pecuniary interests that you need to make yourself familiar with. I talked about the declaration, and historically and now there is an obligation to declare it at the open meeting verbally. But the act has now been changed. And it says not only does a member have to declare verbally, he or she must declare in writing and file that declaration with the clerk. And I've encouraged council members to make sure that they're the same, they're identical. Why? Well, because the clerk has an obligation now to take those, the verbal one and the written one, and put them into a registry so that anyone can go and look at that registry and see when a member declared a pecuniary interest on a matter, or maybe more interesting, when they didn't. So that registry is now available. It's new, it's a relatively new thing, and it's an obligation. So members have to be, I think, cautious in terms of how they structure their declaration, and they want to make sure that the verbal and the written declarations are identical. There's some things that a member cannot do if they are declaring a pecuniary interest. Firstly, they can't participate in that part of the meeting, and they can't vote. And that makes sense. It goes on, though, to say that the member cannot influence. And influence is any time before the meeting. It's not just at the meeting, it's before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And influence has been clarified by the province to include influence not only of other members of council, but of staff. So once you are in a position to have a pecuniary interest, you have to remove yourself, if you will, from the municipal process, and you have to take certain steps to ensure that that you are doing so. I should mention that there is a textbook, and it's called Ontario's Municipal Conflict of Interest Act Handbook. It is published by Municipal World, and if you go to the Municipal World website, this book deals with all the sections of the Act and all of the cases decided from 1972 up until when this one was published. And this is a 2019 version. Encourage you, if you think you might have some pecuniary interest issues, that you get a copy of this book in advance. It's an important read, and will give you an overview in a sense of what's involved. I should say to you, if you are a person who is what we call a single issue candidate, someone who's running because you want to influence and get something that will be to your benefit. I had a developer this a few years ago say to me, I'm running because I want to make sure my development, my new project gets through and I can do it better up from the inside. And after he heard the presentation, he came to me and he said, I can't run. I would be completely stopped from making that project happen. So if you have a circumstance where you or your employer or family member may be in a situation, you need to give some thought to the implications of that before you decide to run for office. So historically, the process to complain under this legislation has been for an elector in your community to bring a court application. That's expensive. And it has, I think, had the impact of not seeing as many cases as might otherwise be the case. The legislation changed just a few years ago, and it now provides that a person, an elector, and it's expanded who's entitled to complain beyond just an elector, but an elector can now complain to the integrity commissioner. That's a far different cost to that person to complain than having to bring a court application, clearly. They may bring the application to court themselves, but the integrity commissioner may also bring the application to court if they believe that it's sufficiently serious to do so. So what have we been seeing of late? Well, the number of complaints, way up. People are looking more carefully at conduct of members and situations where they may have a pecuniary interest. So the complaints are up. And here's the key. The cost of all this, complaints, the investigation, court application, whatever, is borne by the municipality. So when I talked about some municipalities having huge, huge bills, it's because a number of claims have been made both under this act and under the Code of Conduct, and it's costing the municipality significant dollars. It's a big issue. It's not an issue in other places. I spoke at a municipality 2 weeks ago now, and they have not had one complaint under their Code of Conduct, nor have they had a complaint under the conflict of interest legislation. They spend a lot of time training council members to understand their responsibilities. This is an important area, and I really encourage you to look at it carefully in terms of how it will impact you, if it will impact you at all. I said I wanted to mention confidentiality, and I just very quickly, members of council carry around with them a lot of confidential information, whether it's in their head or in their online somehow, or on hard paper copies. Community leaders are involved in a number of issues that, frankly, the public at that point in time shouldn't have access to. And so there's an obligation to maintain confidentiality on this written and verbal material. It's a requirement, as I said, under the Code of Conduct for improper conduct to breach a code. Council members need to be cautious when they're talking to other people, whether it's sitting having a coffee, whether it's on the internet, whether it's in the grocery store. You need to be cautious. And confidentiality goes so far as to include your spouse. Your spouse is not entitled to know confidential information of the municipality. It's a serious obligation and can have significant impacts on the organization if there is a breach of confidentiality. As I said before, individual members of council do not speak on behalf of the municipality. I want to talk about water for a minute, only from the point of view to give you a sense of the obligations on members of council on an area, on a subject matter that is highly regulated. Let me just give you a bit of background. We're all aware of Walkerton. The province's response to Walkerton was to pass the Safe Drinking Water Act 2002. That act was considered at the time probably the best piece of water legislation in the world. It had the greatest protections in it. The province set up the Walkerton Clean Water Center, and that act came into effect except for a section that dealt with personal liability of decision makers. So who are decision makers with respect to this act? Well, we know it's members of council because that's your role, but it also includes all senior staff and includes your water operator. So this act had been in effect for quite a few years, And nobody paid much attention, frankly, to this personal liability section until August of 2012. And at the annual conference of the Association of Municipalities, the province announced that that section was coming into effect on January 1st, 2013. And it did. And so the municipal sector had to scramble to understand what it meant and what members of council had to be doing to protect themselves against this personal liability that was coming their way. Interestingly, in end of January or thereabouts in 2013, a case came to trial and was, these were charges by MOE that had been laid several years before, but they came to fruition, and municipality, it was a Southwestern Ontario municipality. The municipality was fined, significant fine. The chief water operator was also fined and received a jail sentence, 30-day jail sentence. I was doing training on this legislation at a conference in early March, I guess it was. And interestingly enough, the mayor of that community was present. And I spoke to him at the break, and he came to me and he said, "Do you think I could talk to the group?" There were about 75 people there. And I said, "Sure, that'd be great." And he said this, that had this personal liability section been in effect when the charges were laid originally, he had been advised, and council had been advised by the lawyers, their lawyers, and by the MOE that probably all of the members of council would have been charged. So what does that mean to you? And I'm not trying to frighten you off, but I'm trying to make it clear to you that you have enormous obligations and that you need to understand what it means to take on the responsibilities. The test is, are you acting as a reasonable person would in the role that you're fulfilling? There's training for this. And municipalities carry policies of insurance that will respond to this. But it's one example where members of council have to be getting good advice from their staff and from their water operator and from other outside sources as well. You need to be prepared. You need to understand the obligations that come along with it. Delivery of water is a health and safety matter. It's really important. And no one would have any sympathy with a municipality that gets this wrong. It's just an example of the expectation of the province and the public that you are going to be fulfilling the role in terms of meeting the health and safety requirements that are found within that legislation. So let's wrap it up and we'll get to the questions. Understand the role you're elected to fill. What's the job description? Why are you running? What are you expected to be doing when you're elected? And understand the role of the other people in the organization, what their responsibilities are. Talked about municipal powers resting with council, not with councillors. You're not a manager. You cannot direct work. You can't micromanage your organization. Take some time to understand your personal obligations. Read the code of conduct before you put your name in. Understand what obligations are there. Get some training around the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Talk to your family. This is a family decision because it will have a significant impact on your relationship with your family members. Have them understand what you're getting into, and make sure that you can normalize your life, if you will, around these new requirements and these new commitments. I started off by saying congratulations. I really mean it. I think even considering running for council it deserves congratulations. It's a huge step. As I said before, it's a role that will consume you. You will have great fun doing it. You'll be frustrated sometimes, but you'll be a community leader and you'll be seen and recognized throughout your community as that for the next 4 years. Let's end it there. Tatiana, let's see if there are some questions. Why don't I take this?
Actually, Fred, I think we're just going to take a quick 5-minute break till about 8:35. Everyone just wants to kind of get up and stretch. We do have some questions, but if anyone else wants to submit them now while we take our break, please feel free to do so. So we'll be back at 8:35.
Great.
Okay, so I have 8:35, so I think we'll just kind of give everyone a minute to get back on, and then we are going to start with asking some of the questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now, and I want to welcome Chris Bantock, Deputy Clerk, who is going to be reading the questions into the group. I'll invite the clerks who are still able to be here to turn their cameras on in case there are any questions that you would like to answer as well. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Chris.
Thanks, Tatiana. I'll jump into the first question here. So the first question reads, if quorum is 6 members, what happens in the case of a 3-3 vote?
If you have a council of 6, it's an odd council. Most councils in the province are an odd number. Interestingly, in Sudbury, I worked with a council of 10, so we dealt with this situation all the time. If it's a tie vote, it's a loss vote, and that's in the Municipal Act. The Municipal Act sets out, the province sets out all of the voting rules for municipalities, and they're all set out there, and so municipal bylaws will incorporate those rules into it. But a tie vote's a loss vote.
Moving on to question number 2. It reads, are the decisions to go into a closed meeting not always discretionary, except for FOI matters?
They're discretionary generally. Most of them are discretionary. FOI is one, and there's another one, and I can't remember what it is. You have to look at the act, but there are very few that are mandatory that you have to hold in closed. I think development of your emergency plan or parts of it have to be done in closed meeting, for example.
If you'd like, I can happily just kind of jump in there. So the other item where it's a shall is an ongoing investigation respecting the municipality or a local board or a municipal controlled corporation by the ombudsman or the investigator referred into subsection 239(2).
And that's the key word in that section is ongoing. It has to be ongoing. If it's completed, if the investigator has filed the report, the final report, council has no authority to go into a closed meeting for that.
All right, moving on to the next question. It reads, does the council as a whole not have the capability to direct the chief administrative officer to hire, terminate, etc.? To be clear, individual council members do not have any authority over staff, but as a group, they essentially direct staff via the CAO.
That's right.
So the next question reads, Google tells me, what is the role of a mayor in Ontario? What does being a mayor mean? Mayor in modern usage, the head of a municipal government. As such, the mayor is almost invariably the chairman of the municipal council and of the council executive committee. In addition, the mayor may fulfill the roles of chief executive officer, ceremonial figurehead, and local agent of the central government. So exactly what extra powers does a mayor on Stratford Council compared to a councillor? Does he set agendas, decide what will be discussed or not?
Mayor does not set the agendas. The agenda is set by staff. The responsibilities of the mayor are set out in detail. Remember I said the province gives job descriptions? They're set, those responsibilities are set out in the Municipal Act for the head of council. That includes mayors, and they're there. The summary you read is pretty close. It's not exactly on, but it's pretty close to it. But I refer people, if they want to read it, to look at the couple of sections in the Act itself.
The next question reads, could you talk about citizen assemblies, participatory budgeting, and the idea of open democracy in the context of governance?
This question came up in writing a few weeks ago, and it's an interesting one. Let me give you a sense of a budget process for municipalities. Citizen assembly and budgeting is one technique where councils can get information from the public to provide advice to council. One of the issues I think it's important is that if you're going to get into that sort of a model, that there be an education of that group in advance in terms of the limitations on setting a municipal budget. A large number of the things that municipalities do, there's really very little wiggle room in terms of the budget that's there. And the main areas where council has most discretion are in terms of soft services, Parks and Rec. But the vast majority of a lot of the budget areas, there are some restrictions, and a lot of those often tie around the staffing levels. For example, the fire department primary amount in a fire department budget is administration. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind, and it's really fundamental to all this, is no matter what system council used to get advice from the public on budget matters or other matters, but around budget matters is at the end of the day, council makes the decision. It is obligated to pass the bylaw that sets the budget for the municipality. So it's how it receives, again, it's this receiving information from the public. And if it's going to do it through something like a citizen assembly, there has to be some education of that group before, so that they have a sense of what some of the constraints are on municipal budgeting as a whole.
All right, next question. Question reads, does the personal liability for drinking water also extend to the groundwater quality, i.e. well water, where contamination of the well water originates from a municipal property?
We're getting pretty specific. This act deals with potable water. You'd have to look at the specific situation to see if it does apply. I can't get you into details of a particular situation.
Next question reads, finally, a group of people are considering running for council together. Can you comment on this? Is not covered in the Municipal Elections Act, but the ministry says that a slate is allowed as long as consideration is given to the election financing rules and regs.
I can jump in here. So it is correct. So as outlined in the candidates guide that was prepared by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, with regards to joint campaigns and running on a slate, it says there's nothing in the Municipal Elections Act that would prevent like-minded candidates from campaigning on the same platform or identifying themselves as a group or slate. However, each candidate must keep their campaign finances separate, and any joint expenses, for example, signs with two candidates' names on them, must be divided between the campaign. And then the recommendation is that for information on campaign finance rules, to see the campaign finance page on page 16 or refer to the Municipal Elections Act sections on it.
Next question reads, where does one officially register to run? What is the deadline? What is the cost? Are there debates or events against opponents during the lead up to election day? Please describe the process in detail.
That's another election-related question. I think us clerks will take it on. So as Fred mentioned earlier, nominations begin on May 2nd and they run until August 19th at 2 p.m. Please pay attention to the deadline. 2 p.m. is hard and fast rule. 2:01 is too late unless you're in the office and the clerk has acknowledged you being there before 2 o'clock. All of the information about nominations will be posted to our respective websites. But basically the process is on May 2nd, you'll be able to either come into our offices or obtain a copy of the candidates package from our website. Again, I will defer to the individual clerks on the process that they're going to be following. You will submit the nomination form, which is a prescribed form from the provincial government. It is available online and will also be in your package. Along with your nomination form, you'll need to submit the required fee. So it's $200 for mayor and $100 for members of council. And if it's a municipality with 4,000 or more persons, you need to submit 25 endorsement signatures. Again, it has to be a minimum of 25. We do always recommend and encourage that you get more than 25. So we would recommend 25 to about 30. And that's just to make sure that you have a minimum of 25. You have to ensure that everyone who signs is eligible to vote on the day that they endorse the signature. It has to be fully complete. It can't be duplicate. So again, we always recommend going out and getting more. We would hate for you to come in on the last day and have to kind of run out into Market Square or another public place to grab another signature. So with that, I'm going to pause there and see if any of the clerks want to add anything further to that.
All right, I'm not seeing anything. Last question. Oh, sorry, second last question. Can you please highlight any proposed changes to the Integrity Commissioner legislation and how investigations are changing?
We may be seeing some changes. There's been some discussion around it. This Bill 10 is certainly potential change in terms of the IC, the Integrity Commissioner, going to court to have a person removed from council. There's some speculation, but at this point, we're not likely to see much of anything else because of the provincial election. So it may be the fall or next spring before we see anything, if there are going to be significant changes.
All right, the next question has already been answered. And then the last question here is, that's here right now, is can any of the 25 endorsements live in the same address?
Yes, so it's my understanding they can, they just have to be an elector the day that they vote. So again, you could have 5 people living in an address, and as long as they're all eligible, they can submit an endorsement. And a person can endorse multiple candidates, so you're not limited to only endorsing one.
Can I just add one comment to that? You can endorse a candidate if you're in a ward system. Doesn't have to be someone in your ward. It can be someone running in the municipality. You don't. It isn't just a ward-based thing. It's a municipally, the entire municipality-based thing.
All right, well, that's all the questions that I see in the question and answer right now. Give one last call just in case anyone is typing. Okay, not seeing anything additional. So that will end our question period for this evening.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate you taking that on. I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone who attended and for your very thoughtful questions. I would like to thank the area clerks, deputies, and other staff in attendance who helped organize this session and who will be assisting throughout the election. Administering municipal and school board elections is a function provided by the clerk's office, which we all take great pride in. I want to say another thank you to Fred Dean for another wonderful and thoughtful presentation. We are grateful that you continue to offer these sessions and for your work and your guidance. I need to give a special thanks to Jenna and CAO Brett Kittmer for hosting the in-person viewing. So if you have any further questions, especially as we approach the start of nominations on May 2nd, please do not hesitate to reach out to your municipal clerk. Please also check out our website. As I said, that is going to be the place where we're going to post all of the information, and it will be the most up to date. So on this slide, we've broken down our names, our contact information, and the municipal addresses. So with that, I want to wish everyone a good night. If you are driving, drive safe. If you are walking, walk safe. And we're looking forward to seeing you May 2nd.